Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 106 of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm Erin Harris. For this one, I had the chance to chat with Dr. George Magrath, CEO of Opus Genetics, a clinical stage ophthalmic biotech dedicated to developing gene therapies for inherited retinal diseases, or IRDs, and other vision disorders. Dr. Magrath shares how the company is advancing gene therapies for IRDs with a focus on LCA5, which is a rare and severe form of childhood blindness. Now, they've built on the foundational science of Dr. Jean Bennett and leveraging the legacy of Luxturna. And so Opus is developing subretinal AAV-based therapies targeting 7 distinct mutations. Dr. Magrath explains why gene therapy is particularly well suited to IRDs due to the presence of intact retinal structure despite genetic dysfunction. He highlights compelling early clinical data and discusses the promise of early intervention in preserving vision and enabling proper neural development. We talk roadmaps and what's to come, and Dr. Magrath emphasizes the importance of building a sustainable business model to efficiently replicate success across additional rare IRD mutations, ultimately aiming to bring life-changing therapies to more patients. So listeners, I hope you enjoy and learn from this episode just as I did. And so here it is, my conversation with Opus Genetics, Dr. George Magrath. Enjoy.
George, hi. Thanks for joining me on Cell and Gene, the podcast.
Erin, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Absolutely. All right. So tell us a little bit about Opus Genetics and its focus on inherited retinal diseases.
So Opus Genetics is a company focused on inherited retinal diseases. And right now we have 7 of those that are built on the technology that was created by Dr. Jean Bennett at the University of Pennsylvania, also with co-inventors at Mass Eye and Ear and University of Florida, but really building upon the scientific success of Luxturna. So these are all subretinally delivered AAVs targeting different mutations that cause forms of inherited retinal degenerations or childhood blinding diseases. And so we have 7 of them that are all very similar, but just target different mutations. And so it's a play on rare diseases with really good science that comes from the best places. It's been that on platforms that have been de-risked in Luxturna, and goes after really meaningful diseases like these patients, particularly in the LCA5 trial that we have to date, really had transformational responses to the therapy.
Excellent. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about why IRDs, and particularly LCA5, which you mentioned, the LCA5 related IRD, why have they been so difficult to treat to date? And why do you feel that gene therapy is a viable approach?
Oh, I personally, so these in particular were specifically selected for because gene therapy is a good approach for it. Because in these diseases, the photoreceptors, the layers of the retina are still present when the patient becomes symptomatic, but it's missing one ingredient. And so it really is an addition of something that's missing, with the exception of the ROW program, which is a knockdown and replace. That's a little more complicated. But the other 6 are all just very straightforward. So you don't have to worry about atrophy, like the photoreceptors aren't missing. You're just trying to get the photoreceptors that are there to function. And we call that, Dr. Bennett really calls that structure function dissociation. And that creates a pathology that's very amenable to potential gene therapy treatments. So that's why we're excited about gene therapy for these particular reasons. Now, your first part of your question was, why has it been so hard to develop? Well, these are ultra rare diseases, right? And so the patient populations are small. And so for a lot of companies, the population, is not as exciting. But what we've done, the other sort of arm of what we're doing is by using artificial intelligence in our development, by using different techniques in conjunction with the FDA for accelerated development. we're trying to make the development programs efficient enough where the return on these is still really dramatic. And I think we're having a lot of success with that. So we're able to keep the costs down with development, go sort of quickly and safely as we try to prove the safety and efficacy of these, and do it in a very reasonable approach that should hopefully open up rare disease to more development. Right.
Great. Okay. Now, Opus recently reported really encouraging early results from the first pediatric patient treated with LCA5. So can you talk us through, first of all, explain, what that is? And then on top of that, what's the clinical significance of those results and how do they compare with adult outcomes in that same trial?
Yep. So, and this goes back to the efficient development that we're doing. So we're working with the FDA and with the physician and scientific community to go, in a very data-driven approach with how we develop. And so what that really means is that for LCA5, we treated the first 3 adults, right? And now last week at ARVO, we reported the 1-year data from those 3 adults, but we treated those 3 adults and the results were outstanding, right? Those three adults all had significant improvements in functional and in objective, subjective, multiple endpoints. I think one of the quotes from our last KOL day, which was in December for Dr. Christine Kay, was it's atypical to see this many endpoints moving in the same direction. And so when we saw that, when the company saw that, and when the physician community saw that, we sort of went to the FDA and we said, look, we think we found the efficacious dose and it's safe. We would like to treat 3 children. If we have similar results in 3 children, we would expect to be in a pivotal trial. And we'd like to just expand it out. And the response was, well, yeah, that makes for a data-driven approach. It makes sense. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. So right now we've treated actually the first 2 children now. And the first child really had a remarkable improvement that was on par, probably accentuated a little bit in certain areas compared to the 3 adults. And the second child doesn't have as much data, was very recently treated, but we're very optimistic about that child as well. And so what we're looking at as a company is like around the 3rd quarter of this year, we'll be in a position where we'll have the first cohort of pediatric patients data, and we'll be able to take a data-driven approach on the next portion of the trial. And if it keeps going like it's going, we would expect that to be talking about what a pivotal would look like in this population.
Perfect. Excellent. Given especially around rare diseases, especially for IRDs, what role does early intervention play? And can you talk us through sort of the significance of early intervention? What does that actually look like?
There's two reasons that early intervention is really important. The first is a structural reason. And that goes back to that core concept of structure-function dissociation. You want to treat these children while they have a normally developed retina where the photoreceptors or the RPE are missing one ingredient. So you want to have the whole cake, kind of mixed up, and you want to add that one ingredient in. Over time, as these kids become adults, they do atrophy, right? So you will lose that therapeutic window when they're a child as they get into the 3rd, 4th, 5th decades of life. So the first reason is really because you want to accentuate that structure function association and treat these children while they still have a normal structure of the retina. The second thing that you want to do is you want to treat these children early before they form the visual cortical pathways in the brain. There's a concept in ophthalmology called amblyopia, which most people know as lazy eye. And so what that at its fundamental root is if the eyes aren't producing an image, the brain's not forming the pathways to be able to recognize images. So, for example, the first patient we treated was a guy in his late 20s who had never had formative vision, right? Had never been able to see more than like blobs or shadows. And so when he was treated, he was able to actually see objects, and he was able for the first time to be able to like see food on his plate, to be able to get in an Uber, like things like this that we all take for granted in everyday life. But it takes a little bit of time to really learn how to use that vision, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to it. And I think that you don't quite get as good a vision if the occipital lobe and the cortical pathways through the brain don't form when you're a child. And so I think when you treat an early child, so LCA5 patients are diagnosed at about 2 years of life, 1 to 2 years of life. If you could treat them shortly thereafter, you would give them the best opportunity to live a normal life and to form the normal pathways as possible, thereby hopefully giving them the best vision possible. So the second reason is really about the formation of vision in children, and treating earlier helps them create sort of a more normal experience as the brain is developing.
Sure, that makes sense. And remarkable science behind that. That's really, really not only encouraging, but also just life-changing. So
yes,
it's very, very interesting. Okay, talk us through a little bit about how Opus has proposed a single-arm adaptive pivotal trial, for OPGX LCA5, using the multi-luminance orientation and mobility test as a primary endpoint. Right angle, check me if I got that incorrect. But in addition to that, what did the FDA, what was its response? And, why is this endpoint so important for real world benefit?
Yep. So first of all, our experience with FDA has been incredibly collaborative, and we continue to sort of iterate on it with them. But they are, the cool thing about the FDA right now, from our perspective, is their understanding of the limitations of developing an ultra rare and rare disease. And they've really been working with us on creative type design that show the efficacy and safety of the product. And so at the end of the day, what they want us to show for efficacy is that we're improving the patient's life. And so you've got a problem in these IRDs for exactly the reason I mentioned with that first patient we treated, which is like the eye chart is almost meaningless, right? These are patients that have incredibly poor vision and have never, the first patient, the one I was telling you about, he actually got onto the eye chart, was able to see like the big E on the eye chart for the first time ever, but he had to like learn what an E looked like because he'd never seen an E in his life. And so the traditional metrics that you would normally look at in an ophthalmic study are a little bit harder to use. And so what Dr. Bennett did and the team at then Spark Therapeutics, when they got Luxturna approved, was they said, well, let's create a virtual maze. Like it was a real life maze where they put arrows on the ground and then they put little obstacles, and you would vary the luminance. So it was a multi-luminance mobility test. And you would watch the patient go through the test, right? And it worked out really great. They did a good job of validating it. And what Dr. Bennett subsequently did is she moved it to virtual reality. And so using an Oculus, like a Meta headset, the child or adult puts that on, and then you can present that maze to them in virtual reality with a lot more precision and control than you can in real life. And then you can watch as the patient walks around in virtual reality, and then they have the little things on their hands, and you can see they can tap objects, they can do all kinds of different things. But it gives you an ability to, in a very highly controlled environment, it's very replicatable, by the way. Any doctor's office, like any ophthalmologist's office, you can put this headset on your patient. You don't have to have special stuff except for the headset. But it gives you a real real interesting way to be able to track a patient's performance. So what we saw with the first 3 adult patients was really, at least for the first 2 extremely severe patients, they couldn't even complete the course, right? So they would put on the headset, couldn't say anything. They would take like 1 or 2 steps, turn around and stop. And all 3 of the patients afterwards were able to actually complete the course and were able to tag objects. And so it's a very relatable sort of endpoint that gives you that gives you an idea of the therapeutics ability to improve what's most meaningful for the patient, which is navigation and mobility and normal everyday life.
Incredible. That is so interesting. And just even to be able to track the progress again of, and also too, the patients must be so, especially the patients who actually can see something through the virtual reality device. They must take it off for the first time and just feel it's life-changing, as I guess is my point.
Oh, it's very emotional,
I'm sure.
And not just for the patients, but for like their mothers and fathers, like people who they've been watching them the whole life and never, experienced them being able to see. It's very cool. Yeah. It's what's also about the field, it's what's also about ophthalmology. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, given everything we've discussed today and the tremendous work you're doing at Opus, what's next for Opus Genetics?
So what we're trying to do, what I'm really interested in doing is proving that these things can actually create a business, because if they can create a business, then we can roll through all 300 of these genetic mutations one by one, but it has to be self-sustaining, right? And so that's one of the things I'm really interested in, because people like Dr. Bennett and others have done amazing work on the science of this, and it's possible, right? Like they can restore people's vision, but unless you create an environment where you can actually get it done under the regulatory parameters we have and in the market we're in, it won't make it a patient. And that's why we have 7 of these. And so we think that if we can figure out how to efficiently develop, and then we can just replicate that one after the other, that we can not only help people with LC5 mutation, but we can help people with the BEST1 mutation, with the RHO mutation, with the RDH12 mutation, the MERTK mutation, NGB1, all of these different mutations that have a very, very similar core basic science that should have similar improvement. And if we do that, if we can create this model, we call it sort of a string of pearls. We can create this string of pearls, it'll be an incredible thing for the field and an incredible thing for our investors as well. And so that's really the fundamental thing, is figuring out how do you develop an ultra rare disease in a sustainable way that's replicatable. And I think it has to do with efficiency. I think it has to do with being creative. And we're very fortunate that the FDA is working with us on that and other things like that. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that in addition to all the science. I mean, the science is there. I mean, Dr. Bennett's on the short list for a Nobel Prize for what she's done in ophthalmology. And so the science is great. We have to figure out how to get it in patient.
Yeah. Well, I'm certain you will. I know even on Cell and Gene, we non-oncology indications, which this is are becoming more and more prevalent, and the science, like you said, is there, and it's just a matter of having the business side of it match up with it. So this is fantastic. I hope you'll come back and give us an update in 6 months to a year, so we can talk about all the great work that has progressed since this discussion.
That'd be fantastic. Thanks, Erin.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Well, we're at the end of the episode featuring Opus Genetics Dr. George Magrath. George, thank you so much for your time with me and with Cell and Gene, the podcast audience. Thank you for your time. This was excellent.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks for tuning in to our listeners, and we will talk to you soon.